Rectangles are an incredibly useful geometric primitive. You can draw all kinds of things by using boxes. In processing, rectangles include squares. A square is just a rectangle with equal sides. Let's see how to draw one. Here's a processing sketch. As always, the origin is in the upper left corner, the x-axis goes to the right, and the y-axis goes down. To create a rectangle, we need to give processing 4 pieces of information: the x and y values of the upper left corner of the rectangle, the width, and the height. Now, the reason I'm saying we give the xy of the upper left corner is because we measure the width going to the right and we measure the height going down. As long as those numbers are positive, then the rectangle extends to the right and below the XY corner. We'll see more about that in a moment when we do the interactive video. So if we have these 4 numbers, XY, width, and height, then we draw a rectangle just by giving processing the command rect, followed by the X and Y of the upper left corner, the width, and the height. So let's actually see this for an example rectangle. Here we have a rectangle where the upper left corner is at the point 50, 80. The width is 150, and the height is 60. So okay, to create a rectangle then, we start with the command rect. And as always, it's got an open paren just after it. It's got a closed paren and a semicolon at the end. Notice that this isn't the word rectangle. And it doesn't start with a capital R. It's the lowercase r followed by ECT. If you type rectangle, it just won't recognize it. That's how it is. The command is called rect. So I said we give it the X and Y. So the X value is 50. So we name 50 followed by a comma. The Y value is 80. So we identify the 80 followed by a comma. The width is 150. So we type 150 followed by a comma. And then the height is 60. That's the last one. We don't need a comma because now we hit the closed parenthesis. And that command will draw a rectangle at 50, 80 with width 150 and height 60. All right, let's look at another example. I'll blow away the command. Here's a new rectangle. Its upper left is at 4120. Its width is 30 and its height is 100. So you might want to practice for yourself right now and just think about what you would type to create this rectangle. You can pause the video if you want, but here I'll give the command you type. We begin with rect and a pair of parens and a semicolon, as always. We give the X of the upper left corner, the Y of the upper left corner, the width, and the height. And now we have the command to create this rectangle. Now I mentioned that rectangles include squares. So let's take a look at how we create a square. All we have to do is make a rectangle where the width and the height are the same size. Here they're both 60. So we know what the command would be. The upper left corner in X and Y, and the width and the height are both the same value, 60. And in this case, we get a square that's 60 units by 60 units. Let's take a look at all of this in action. So here's a rectangle, the big brown thing in the middle, and the command at the top is showing us what we would type into processing to make this rectangle. You can see that there's a big dark yellow circle in the upper left, and the 2 numbers at the beginning of the rect command are the X and Y values of that dark yellow circle. The big blue circle to the right is just a handle to let me control the width of this rectangle, and the big kind of aqua circle near the bottom is just a handle to let me control the height of the rectangle. Now I can turn these things off if they get in the way, but I'm going to turn them back on so that I can grab them and move them around. So I'm going to grab the upper left corner and move this rectangle around on the screen. And you'll notice that the only 2 numbers that are changing in the rect command are the X and Y of the yellow dot. The width and the height aren't changing, and so we get the same size rectangle. And processing doesn't care if we try to draw off screen. It just draws what it can. So there's our rectangle, and we can put it anywhere we want by just dragging around the upper left corner. Now I can make it narrower if I want by grabbing the circle and just changing the width. you'll notice that the only thing that's changing is the third number, the width of the rectangle. If I make the width very, very, very small, get a very narrow rectangle, and I can make it huge again. And of course, I can change the height. And you'll notice now the only number that's changing is the height. And as I drag this thing up and down, I can get a skinny rectangle or a taller one. Finally, let's make a square. Tell you what, let's try to make it 450 by 450 if I can eyeball that. Remember, there's no special command for making a square. You just make the two sides the same length. Now, the width and the height are both 450, and I can drag this square around anywhere I want. Now, one thing that I want to mention is I discussed how this yellow dot is conventionally thought of as the upper left corner. And generally, we think of it that way when the width and the height are positive, because the width tells us how far to the right to go, and the height tells us how far down to go. But suppose that we make the width negative. So I'm going to grab the width control here, and I'm just going to slide it left, 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 and you'll see it's getting smaller and smaller. When width gets to be nearly 0, it's a very skinny rectangle. It can, in fact, be exactly 0, and then you just get a line. And now width is negative. So processing is perfectly happy to draw a negative width rectangle, and we can drag it around just like usual. What it means to have negative width is simply that the line that controls the width of the rectangle now goes to the left instead of to the right. And that puts this yellow circle, the XY that we're providing as the first two numbers, to our eyes, it now ends up in the upper right. So it's not exactly always right to call this the upper left coordinate. We say that because when width and height are both positive, it is the upper left. But if we make width negative, the yellow dot ends up in a different corner, the first point. And we can make height negative too. I'll just drag height up, and now height is negative. I'll pull this out of the way. And we can end up with this dot anywhere we want in any of the four corners by choosing one or the other or both of width and height to be negative. So it's technically not exactly right to call this the upper left, but we think of it that way, again, because when width and height are both positive, it is the upper left. Typically, when I draw a rectangle, although this is a perfectly legitimate way to draw a rectangle, I like to think of the width and height as positive, because that lets me consistently know that the yellow XY is, in fact, upper left. But heck, that just works for me. If you don't have any problem keeping the negative numbers straight in your head, go for it. Whether you choose to use positive width and height or negative width and height or a mix, remember that the first two numbers are the XY of one corner and then your width and your height, and you can draw as many rectangles as you like this way.